Chapter 6 of The Adventures of a Bear, and a Great Bear, too. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Adventures of a Bear, and a Great Bear, too, by Alfred Elwes. Progress. The Fair of Caneville was like fairs in most other parts of the world, and contained the usual elements of fun and wickedness, toys and dirt, sweets, and other messes. As all these various ingredients looked best at night, when the broad sun was withdrawn and an artificial light very feebly supplied its place, it was towards evening that the fair began to fill, and doubtful characters to ply their various vocations. It was a matter of remark that there was much more quarreling and ill humor in the fair this particular year than there had been in several previous periods. And it was also observed that a tall and powerful bear, no other than our hero Bruin, was ever in the midst of it, either as an instigator or a principal. This circumstance made the authorities more than usually alert, and caused Master Bruin to be closely watched. It was at the close of the last day, after many scenes of evil which it is not necessary to describe, that a serious disturbance arose in the part of the field where Bruin had his stand. Blows soon followed angry words, and the contending parties flew at each other with great ferocity. Growl followed growl, and bite preceded bite, so that a good deal of blood was shed, ill blood, so perhaps better out than in. And as Bruin's sticks were conveniently at hand as weapons of offense, they were soon seized upon and used so indiscriminately that almost every throw told. Many were stretched on the ground, and one of the mastiff police was thought to be killed. This was a serious offense. Indeed, those who knew the penalty attending such a calamity instantly took flight. They were as instantly pursued, and when about to be captured, with one voice denounced Bruin as the culprit, though in fact it was not he who had struck the blow, and they knew it. But such was his known ferocity and ill temper, that to shield themselves they were ready to give up the wrong beast whom no one loved, and whom every one would have suspected as the author of the calamity. So the bear, in spite of his protestations of innocence, and in spite, too, of a most ferocious resistance, in the course of which he got more than one savage bite from a small animal he had injured, he was dragged off to prison. The place used for this purpose was a portion of a ruined castle, standing in the center of the town, on the banks of the rivulet before spoken of, the ruin itself of great antiquity, and having been evidently erected by a very different class of beings than that which formed the present population of Caneville. Several compartments were adapted for the purpose, all more or less secure, but the square stone chamber into which Bruin was thrust was the strongest of them all. The door opened outwards, was closed on him, and secured by a heavy mass of rock, which the united efforts of several police rolled against it. And having thus deposited the prisoner in safety, a couple mounted guard at the entrance, in case by any chance the great strength of the bear should succeed in removing the fastening. Bruin seemed, however, in no humor to make the experiment. Sore and worn out, he crawled into a corner and was soon fast asleep, resuming his dreams some of his old avocations. He woke at daylight, and immediately rose to examine his prison. The door he sniffed at, but passed by. The window was at so great a height from the floor that he could not reach it upon tiptoe, but he remarked that a very delicious puff of air came down an aperture originally used as a chimney. He moved hastily towards it, and many feet above observed the blue sky and the large branch of a tree waving over the aperture. Had messieurs the police been aware of Bruin's climbing propensities, they would have scarcely have left this point unguarded. As it was, the bear proceeded immediately to take advantage of it. With a spring he caught hold of an opening formed by a missing stone, and drawing his body up with his paw, he stuck his foot into the hole and pressed his broad back against the opposing side. A projecting brick gave him a second hold, and then the difficulty was over. For the chimney narrowing, he managed to get up by simple pressure of his knees and back, and the use of his broad and muscular paws. A few seconds sufficed for him to reach the top, on which he sat with his heels dangling in the air, to enjoy the prospect and take breath, while he deliberated on his further proceedings. Meanwhile, an inquiry had been entered upon by the authorities of Caneville concerning the riot in which one of the police was alleged to have been killed. But as the object of the inquiry limped into the assembly during the sitting, it was not considered worthwhile to hear evidence as to the authors of his death. And as he, moreover, distinctly stated that the beast who struck the blow was not a bear, it was ordered that the bear who was in custody on the charge should be liberated forthwith. Great was the surprise of his guards, however, on proceeding to his prison to find that he had anticipated the verdict and had taken the liberty of setting himself free. In what way was pretty clear, as, on looking up the chimney, they were no less amused than astonished to see him just in the act of swinging himself onto the projecting branch of the tree and disappeared from their view. They ran around into the court to mark the end of the Bruin's maneuvers, but he had been too quick for them. Not knowing of his being again a free bear and apprehensive of being pursued, he had descended the tree with utmost velocity, climbing over a ruined wall and dropping, not lightly, into the stream, with a few bold strokes reaching the opposite shore, where he immediately climbed a leafy oak with the intention of waiting till the hue and cry was over. He kept his position very quietly all day, rather surprised that no commotion should be visible in or about the prison, of which he commanded a great view. And as evening was falling, he resolved to descend and recross the stream higher up, seek refuge in some one of his late haunts. Just as he was about putting this resolution into effect, he heard voices behind the tree and lay quiet, still, to listen. But what was his astonishment as they drew nearer to perceive that one of the two foxes from whom the sounds proceeded was his former steward and factotum. His interest in their movements was, of course, increased, and he listened with his ears and eyes bent down to catch every syllable and look. The stranger fox, it appeared, was about crossing the brook to the city. The other one had accompanied him thus far, but refused to enter the town. On this, the following words reached Bruin's ear. Stranger, I have noticed more than once, cousin, that you avoid the town, and yet I have known you to declare that no one but a crow could live in the country. It is true, my dear fellow, but since I left his service, you know I don't care to run the risk of meeting him. Ha ha! I see you are rather apprehensive that he should seize you by the throat and exclaim, My money or your life! Hush, hush! Who knows what ears may be listening? Enough that! I have comfortable competency, and I don't choose to run the risk of losing it. Well, well, cousin, I say no more, but remember your grandfather and mine never left his home for fear of meeting with a wolf who owed him a grudge, and was found dead in his bed, having been murdered by the very wolf after all. Come, you needn't look so down about it, old fellow. Nothing half so bad, I hope, will come to you. Ta-ta! So saying, the stranger fox took leave of his cousin and was soon on the opposite shore. Fox waited till he saw him land, and then slowly turned to retrace his steps. Scarcely, however, had he taken half a dozen paces than a rushing noise smote his ears, and before he could raise his head, a heavy body struck him down between the shoulders with a violence that dashed him flat to the ground. He neither moved nor uttered a cry. His neck was broken. With a savage howl, Bruin, for it is easy to guess that it was he, put his heavy paw upon the other's chest. But finding it still, he examined his clothes, whence he took all the valuables. He paused in his work to chide his own precipitancy, for had he allowed the fox, he might, perhaps, have learnt his dwelling and regained a great part of his property. It was too late now, so giving a savage kick on the face of the unfortunate animal, he heaved it over with leaves and pursued his original intent of regaining the city, and before night was once more beneath the roof of a late associate. He remained for several days perfectly quiet and inactive, but finding no search was instituted for him, he, little by little, resumed his old habits and, as many knew to their cost, his old overbearing temper. Among the tastes prevailing to an immense extent in the community of Caneville, a great love for those dainties which we call oysters had always been remarkable. It occurred to Bruin, as he had now some trifling capital, that he would invest a portion in such articles as made up the fixtures and stock in trade of an oyster merchant. The former expression is, however, a misnomer, for the stall and tubs included under the term fixtures would be more properly described as movables. It was soon effected, and Bruin, having chosen a semi-respectable thoroughfare where he would have a chance of a customer or two from the upper and would not be too far removed from the lower class of Caneville society, he planted his stall, arranged his tub, spruced up his own person with the addition of a most formidable collar and a most doubtfully clean apron, and vociferated his "penny a lot, pups, penny a lot," in a way which greatly edified the bystanders. The bystanders were, however, soon induced to become purchasers, for very few of them could resist oysters, if they had the wherewithal to purchase them, and Bruin's natives were so fine and fresh, and he had so clever a knack of opening, that it was really worth the money to see him do that, and many actually went there for the purpose, so that it really seemed that he had at last hit upon a business for which he was entirely suited, which met also the public views, and that a short time would enable him with prudence to save provisions for his old age. But alas, the perversity of bears! No sooner did anything like a smile from Fortune's face alight upon him than he seemed resolved by his uncompromising temper to turn it into a frown. As long as the business was new to him, he took pleasure in performing the duties belonging to it in a proper manner, a little roughly, it may be, but still properly. Directly it grew familiar, and he became careless, and he had the most wilful habit of aggravating his customers, which could not, of course, continue without seriously injuring his trade. For instance, when some pert young puppy would come forward and civil enough request his 1 or 2 pennies worth of natives, Bruin would first insist on having the money paid down, and then tantalize his customer by offering him the opened oyster and hastily withdrawing it just as the impatient jaws were about to close on the desired morsel, and so to the end, to the vast irritation of many, an irascible little animal. And a day came when the same spirit caused the upset of his trade and set a veto upon his selling the natives, at least in Caneville, for the future. A fox and a young terrier had both paid their money and were eagerly waiting their oysters, disturbing by their clamor a grave old dog who was licking the shell of his last penny's worth, when a domestic from a wealthy family, arrayed in a superb livery cloak, came up to order a lot for his master. The usual game, if it could be called so, when all the fun was on one side, was being played. 3 distinct efforts had been made by Terrier to get his second installment, when, in the struggle which ensued, the vinegar bottle was knocked over, the cork came out, and the perfidious fluid, highly adulterated with vitriol, for, to the shame be it spoken, the dogs of distillers did not hesitate to endanger their lives of the inhabitants with such practices, poured in full volume over the rich livery cloak of the servant, which was completely soiled. The master, who was as powerful as he was avaricious, made a formal complaint against Bruin and his stall as a nuisance, and as it is impossible, even in Caneville, to obtain perfect justice, the report, without other inquiry, was taken as correct, and Bruin boiled with rage and had the mortification of seeing his tub smashed, his stall destroyed, and his natives scattered all abroad without being able to strike a blow in their defense. End of Chapter 6. Read by Jim Scheel, Los Angeles, California, December 28, 2022.